purple America, they were tired. They just wanted things to go back to normal back in 2020. And they thought they were a return to normalcy, to borrow Warren G. Harding's line. But President Biden came in with an agenda that would be completely appropriate for a new Democratic president who had won by a landslide and with massive majorities in the House and Senate. Very aggressive, very ambitious, and remember people talk about historic and transformational. But wait a minute. He won by about 130,000 votes scattered across 4 states. The Senate was 50-50. They had only a handful majority in the House. That's called just barely winning.
Welcome to a special edition of the Hawthorn Groups Across the Eye. Special because of the special guest, the great Charlie Cook. Special because we're coming to you from a very special place, 5-Star Preserve in Kellyton, Alabama, one of the great upland bird shooting operations in America. Charlie and I are down here with the usual cast of suspects, having a good time. Charlie, as everybody listening to this podcast, though, been the premier political analyst in America for the last 40 years. I'm friends with every one of those. And Charlie, since the momentous elections of November 4th, we had the Epstein revelation to the reversal of the White House position. We've had a proposed settlement dropped on Ukraine, favorable to Russia. Conflict goes on in the Middle East, and if that wasn't enough, on Friday evening, Marjorie Taylor Greene announced that she would not run for re-election and that she expected the Republicans to lose the majority in the House. Let's start with Marjorie Taylor Greene. Is this a canary in the coal mine for the MAGA Trump machine?
I think we are at a different place, but in a way it's remarkable that it took this long for any cracks at all in the foundation under President Trump to appear. So it's inevitable that will happen for any second-term president, but and particularly a movement but for it to get this kind of deep in, that's really pretty surprising that, we'd never seen a president. I don't think we've seen a president where it was within a party considered almost treason to say something against the party leader. And we just never heard that before. And just in the last couple of weeks, really since the beginning of the shutdown, maybe a little bit before, we started seeing little bitty things. And the president of the state senate in Indiana basically dragging his feet on doing a mid-decade redistricting. We're just sort of seeing little bitty actions of independence or that you didn't see in the first term. You just really did.
I want to come back to redistricting, but to go across the aisle, one of the headlines about Chuck Schumer after the momentous vote to reopen the government was the tragedy of Chuck Schumer. Is he in serious trouble as majority or minority leader? Is he in serious trouble for re-election with AOC and perhaps an AOC Mondani-led fight from the left?
Yeah, Senator Schumer is not up until 2028.
Right.
So whether he seeks re-election or not, whether AOC primaries or not, but the thing is, there's no obvious person. The number two was, Dick Durbin from Illinois is retiring. There's no obvious number two that's there. But also, of the 8 Democratic senators that voted with Republicans, I think there was a larger number who voted no, but were hoping yes, where they wanted the shutdown to come to a conclusion. They knew that this really wasn't going to help. That Trump was just not going to cave in on the health issue, but they didn't want to alienate the party base. And they remember how much grief that Schumer got back in March for having sided with Republicans. So I think there were a half dozen more Democrats that voted against the deal, but were pleased to see that it actually happened. And so it's tough. But I mean, nobody was gonna. It was just there was no incentive for President Trump to cave in. I mean, there just wasn't. And this is a
He
guy.
rarely does that voluntarily anyway.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. That's just not. I don't think that was in the cards, and I think Democrats started kind of realizing that. But at the same time, they knew their base, and their base just talked themselves into thinking that they lost the presidency because they weren't opposing him strenuously enough without sort of realizing, well, wait a minute, he hadn't been president for 4 years at the time of the election. And, they were really sort of paying a price for the cost of living soaring 4 years under Biden. And, just as the 2020 election was about President Trump and not about Joe Biden, 24 was about Joe Biden and really wasn't about then former President Trump. But it was they were very critical of the Biden Harris administration, and I think it was a thumbs down on that. And that you had groups that traditionally had voted for Democrats that were upset about the cost of living being at 40 years high, and or inflation at 40-year high, and the cost of living going up 25% over the 4 years. And so they voted to punish uh, the Biden Harris administration, but you saw them start coming back, kind of reversion to the mean, coming back into the fold and voting for Democrats. And when, I don't think they really voted for Trump as much as they were voting to punish Biden and Harris in 2024.
Well, as you know, I'm a huge fan of Ezra Klein and his theory of the effect of tribal membership on voting. His view, the single greatest motivating factor for a vote in America is who puts my tribe at the greatest risk. And so a vote to punish makes great sense. Before we talk about what the November 4th elections mean, you use the word redistricting. Given the about to be appealed to the Supreme Court ruling in Texas, are we going to see the massive redistricting to the net benefit of Republicans that the Democrats are scared to death of?
Well, you and I are both traditionalists, institutionalists, and I think I say for both of us, hated to see this happen in the hard a decade. That just doesn't happen, and it doesn't matter whether it's Republicans or Democrats doing it. And I'm not a lawyer, and so I have no idea what the court's going to end up doing with Texas. But um, I had worked under an assumption that Republicans would net come out 5 or 6 seats ahead of, and right now that's not clear that will even happen. And there is a scenario that the Democrats actually come out ahead. But the thing is, in midterm elections, um, the norm is about 20 seats going against the president's party, and that you can't redraw enough districts to undo something like that. I mean, you can shave a half dozen off, but you can't undo that. And while, yeah, there are fewer competitive congressional districts around the country than there used to be, absolutely, which means it's not likely to be a big number of seats, 40, 50. We had a 64. I mean, it's not going up there, but it doesn't make it any less likely
that it's going to be 18, 20, 25, something like that. And so I would be very surprised to see Republicans hold on to the House, but at the same time, I'm not entirely sure Democrats will even make gains at all in the Senate. And the Senate, I think it's a fantasy to think that Democrats could get a majority in the Senate in the next election.
And certainly not a veto.
Oh gosh, no, no. But
Well, not by 10 votes.
yeah, I mean, we have a weird situation where if you divide the country up, there are 24 red Republican states, and all of them voted Republican for Trump for all three times. You have 19 blue states that voted for Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris three times. And then you have the 7 states in the middle that are the swing states. And it's fascinating. These states, they voted 6-1 in favor of Trump in 2016, with Nevada the one that didn't. And then they went 6-1 for Biden over Trump, with North Carolina the only one of the 7 that didn't. And then they end up going 7-0 for Trump at the end of against Harris, against the Biden administration. But all the action is just in this very narrow number of states. But what's interesting is that in the Senate, Democrats have 10 of the 14 U.S. senators in those 7 states right now. And Democrats have won 81% of the Senate races in those 7 states from 2018 on, since Trump first took office. And so you say, gosh, well, that's great for Democrats. And the problem is, but there are 24 red states, which translates to 48 Republican senators, which means they're within a putt of a majority without winning any purple states. And so there are too many red states for Democrats, but at the same time, they are doing disproportionately well in those purple states. And I think just a kind of, I think there are 2 issues that Republicans have. And one is, in a red state, Republicans can nominate whoever they want, and they're going to win no matter what. And in a blue state, Democrats can nominate whoever they want, and they're going to win. But it matters who you nominate in these swing states. And if you're Republicans, if you nominate a red state candidate, somebody that do great in a red state, but in a purple state, that's a problem. Or Democrats nominate. So, I mean, you could nominate somebody that would win in Alabama or Missouri or my home state of Louisiana easily.
They're not going to win in Arizona.
They're not going to win in a purple state, and so it's a matter of matching up, ideologically, sort of stylistically, and also you just have to be a smarter, sharper, better candidate to win in a purple state than in if you're a Republican, a red state, or if you're a Democrat, a blue state. It's really interesting.
The current in the river is not going to carry it at the bank, unless you could swim as well.
Exactly, and sometimes primary voters get a little over their skis, and they do something because it feels good as opposed to being smart. And we saw, Republicans do that in 2010 and 12 during the Obama presidency, where they had Senate races that they would have won if they had nominated Todd Platt,
Right.
they'd have won. But instead, they nominated somebody that would win easily in certain kind of states, but were toxic and couldn't win in those. So,
Well, as I've often heard you say, absent a landslide, the quality of the candidate ultimately matters.
in purple states, yes,
Got it.
and the candidate in the quality matters very little in red states, and very little in blue states. It matters completely in purple states.
Well, the last time candidates went to the ballot was a few weeks ago on November 4th. Progressive Democrats won big mayor's races in New York, Seattle. Democrats won far bigger than the polls predicted in New Jersey and Virginia. Governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general increased control of the House of Delegates. All the Democratic judges were fine in Pennsylvania. Two Democrats, the Republican Public Utility Commissioners in Georgia for the first time since 2000 and beat them more than 60-40. What's the takeaway? Does that matter a year out from the 26 election?
You know, you and I both had turducken, and I remember a friend of mine the first time he tried it. You know, where you take a duck and you stuck a chicken, and then you stuff it in a duck, and you stuff that in a turkey. And a friend of mine had one for the first time. He said, "Wait, there's just way too much going on there." Um, there was a lot going on in those elections. The simple fact that Democrats won the governorship of New Jersey and won the governorship AG as Attorney General, Secretary of State in Virginia, that's not newsworthy because they are blue states, like blue states. And had Biden not tanked 4 years earlier, Democrats would still had the Virginia governorship. But they did it, and in the legislative race, they did overperform some, but the fact that they just won those wasn't really terribly newsworthy. Now, the two incumbent Republican public service commissioners that lost re-election in Georgia, now that's interesting, and that shows that there's a populist pop out there on utility rates. But you know, there was, at least in New Jersey and Virginia, more of a reversion to the mean where things, it went back to voting more where it should have, but maybe just a little bit better than that for Democrats, if you look at the legislative gains. But but the Mondami, I have never seen a mayor's race anywhere that mattered anywhere else. And it's been the 1870s or 80s, as I recall, since a New York City mayor ever was elected to anything else. His name was John T. Hoffman. He was a Tammany Hall guy. I mean, that it doesn't, outside of New York City, it doesn't matter. And for a really liberal guy to beat a serial sex harasser in a Democratic primary, I don't find earth shattering, or to win a general. And the ironic thing is that Mandami's win in the general election, he ran 18 percentage points lower than Kamala Harris did in the city of New York City. I mean, so winning a Democrat winning citywide in New York City with 50.4% of the vote, that's actually kind of embarrassing.
Yeah. Well, what appears, as you look around the country, to be increasingly relevant, and I ask that as the Democrats are going through their eternal identity crisis, the Republicans are going to have to figure out what their identity is post-Trump, and it may still be Trump through the 28 election in terms of identity and message. Affordability, I mean, as Washington is consumed with the Epstein files, how
47 million Americans
47 million Americans voted to re-elect Bill Clinton. Not one of them thought it was
they couldn't have.
They couldn't have.
What's getting traction out there?
What's getting traction out there?
What identity?
What identity?
Two
separate questions. What's getting traction? And what identity are the Democrats likely to settle on?
I do not know where the Democratic Party is going to go. I think that they have a chronic problem of misreading elections, and that when Joe Biden beat President Trump in 2020, well, actually, we were talking earlier, ever since Donald Trump rode down that golden escalator in 2015, it's been a roller coaster. Emotional, political roller coaster, up and down, and in red Republican America and among Republicans, he is king, hero, couldn't be any stronger than he is. Among blue Democratic America, he's the devil or a clown or something like that. But purple America, they were tired. They just wanted things to go back to normal back in 2020. And they thought they were a return to normalcy, to borrow Warren G. Harding's line. But President Biden came in with an agenda that would be completely appropriate for a new Democratic president who had won by a landslide and with massive majorities in the House and Senate. Very aggressive, very ambitious. And remember, people talk about historic and transformational. But wait a minute. He won by about 130,000 votes scattered across 4 states. The Senate was 50-50. They had only a handful majority in the House. That's called just barely winning. And rather than govern within the margins, in the middle, they went too aggressively, and of course, cost of living, and they paid a price. And now I think it's President Trump is overreading his victory. It was really more of a rejection of Biden and Biden-Harris. And I think among swing voters, and I was just looking at some polls like the brand new Fox News poll came out a couple of days ago. Among independents, President Trump's approval rate was 27%. Other polls, 24, 25, it's been sub 30 for a week or two, a couple of weeks. That, in red America, those states, those districts are overwhelmingly Republican. In blue America, they're overwhelmingly Democratic. But in these seven purple states and, 2-3 dozen swing congressional districts, they're disproportionately independent. And where President Trump made the incredibly strong in red areas, he's almost toxic and independent in swing areas. And that's where those congressional seats that are right in the middle, where they are.
Well, and as college kids have been sublisting to my lectures for years, have heard me say, independent societal option. Republicans vote for Republicans, Democrats vote Democrats, and independents decide the election.
That's and yet, as when you and I were growing up, we had 2 broad-based, diverse political parties. That Democrats were left of center, Republicans were right of center. There was a substantial overlap between the two.
There was a big center.
Right. And that each party had moderating influences, influences that kept the Democratic Party from going off into a ditch on the left, or the Republican Party from going off into a ditch.
Say Jackson.
Yeah, or look at all the Democratic senators in the South, back in the 70s, for example, or liberal moderate Republicans from New England, Northeast, West Coast. And when you started to see conservatives leaving the Democratic Party, liberals leaving the Republican Party, moderates in each party decreasing their involvement, you started seeing the parties moving further and further apart, and over time becoming almost tone deaf to how anyone sees what they say or do. Anyone from outside of their party, each of the 2 parties, they don't ever have to talk to swing voters anymore. They're so insular, so self-absorbed. And so now independent voters, they don't vote for anyone. They vote against. They go to punish. Is who has disappointed or hurt me most recently?
As replied to tribal voting theory.
Yeah.
You highlighted 26 as a very likely and historic eventually regain of the House by Democrats. The Senate seems to be out of the Democrats' reach. Of course, the big race is for 28 White House. How do you see the process playing out? I mean, clearly, on the Democratic side, the early contender has to be the governor of the largest state in America, Gavin Newsom. But there's Andy Beshear and there's J.B. Pritzker, Secretary Buttigieg. How will the Democrat race be run?
What's interesting is last week I went to New Hampshire twice to see Democratic candidates doing appearances in Manchester, and so that's getting big.
Let me point out, it's a little more convenient for you to do that today now that you live in Maine.
That's true, but it's great just jump in a car, drive 2 hours, and watch all this. Now we don't know where New Hampshire is going to fall on the calendar, or Iowa. The ironic thing is that while Iowa and New Hampshire are extremely white and not representative of the country as a whole, they do represent small town and rural America where Democrats that had become a no-fly zone nationally for Democrats, and they would be well advised to have some early primaries, caucuses, whatever, in places that they become conditioned to talk to people that don't live in major metropolitan areas.
My late friend Gary Pascore in Missouri used to say, the question is, how will they play at Edith's Cut and Curl in Moberly, Missouri?
I think exactly right, and that's why I love going to Iowa. There's not a lot unique to Iowa or New Hampshire, but what's good is that the people in those two states kind of get the deal that we're going to have a ton of money spent in our state. We're going to get a lot of attention, and our pet issues are going to get more attention and respect and deference than they deserve. But the price of that is we've got to go down to the community center or the fire station or whatever and listen to presidential candidates and kick the tires and ask them questions. And that other states could learn how to do that, but it would probably take 20, 30 years before it would get into the culture that's already there for whether it's Democrats or Republicans in Iowa and New Hampshire. So I'm sort of a big fan. But looking at 28, first of all, I think it would be very, very hard for any Republican to beat Vice President Vance. And it's not necessarily because of him so much, but city vice presidents don't lose party nominations. They just don't. And whether you go back to, Nixon in 1960 or Humphrey in 68, you kind of go all the way through Al Gore, is that city vice presidents win their party's nomination. Now they may lose general election, but it's just a big advantage to have to overcome. And while Marco Rubio is a pretty talented guy, I think that there will be a lot of pressure on Republicans not to put President Trump in too late darker status too early. That he went along. He would probably not appreciate people early, openly jockeying for his job, for a job that now belongs to him. And so Vance will get something of a pass because as vice president, you can kind of go and cut ribbons and do lots of things. But there'll be a lot of pressure against any other Republicans doing that. So I think he'll have a big advantage. The Democrat side, you mentioned Gavin Newsom, and he will have all the money in the world and all that, but you come up through California politics, and you generally have to have embraced, on the Democratic side, positions that would be a hard time defending in Moberly, Missouri. Yeah. I mean, and things that Kamala Harris had to, the things that she said or going along with to rise up through California politics came back to fight her on the rear end. But so I don't know how well he will end up playing on the road, but there are a lot of talented people. We'll kind of see how it play out. We have a long way to go on the Democratic side.
To wrap this up on a shorter time perspective, what's your unexpected surprise in 26? Is it Rob Sand, the Democrat for governor of Iowa? Does Tom Steyer catch out with the voters in California? What's out there that we're not expecting?
Well, we're not expecting it. We don't know what. But yeah, to me, one of the most pivotal things is how does Senator John Cornyn, does he win his nomination or not? Because there's no way in the world Democrats would beat him in general election. But the Attorney General, if Ken Paxton beats him in the primary, then suddenly Democrats become a competitor in a state where they really shouldn't be terribly competitive. I think playing field's going to be very, very narrow. It's going to be Democrats trying to beat Susan Collins in Maine and trying to beat John Ossoff in Georgia, trying to win an open seat in Michigan, maybe New Hampshire, Minnesota. And then on the Republican side, Republicans will be trying to. Actually, I think I got those confused, but I mixed it up. But there are basically 6 Senate races. Republicans have to worry about North Carolina. They have to worry about Collins. I might have to. Might have to worry about Texas.
Well, and again, the primaries become even more important, as you say, for the Democrats in Maine. If that crazy oyster farmer happens to knock off the governor in the primary, it's an end for Johnny.
It's suddenly Susan Collins wins another term. Yeah, I mean, simple.
If Cornyn loses to Paxton in Texas, as you say, the Democrats who are dead and buried in Texas suddenly come back to life.
Yeah, that becomes an unforced error.
Yeah.
For Republicans. So it matters whether they make pragmatic nominations or ones that make them feel good. And just as they during the Tea Party days back during the Obama administrations, they got a little over their skis. And in 2022, what should have been a terrible year for Democrats, it wasn't as bad as it should have been because Republicans nominated some really exotic and problematic people and lost races they should have had a very good chance of winning because they nominated the wrong people. So, without knowing who wins these primaries, we sort of don't. There's so much that we don't know, but it's a heck of a business, and it's changed a lot since you and I first got in the business, and it's unrecognizable from back in the 70s.
Absolutely. It's a different game. Well, Charlie, I'm grateful to you, as I've been for years. When clients and colleagues call and ask me what I think about races, I always say, I don't know. Charlie hasn't told me yet what I think.
Well, John is one of the wisest people in politics. If you've seen everything happen 3 times,
Eventually, you might catch on.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people that haven't seen a tenth as much as John has, and also just a great, generous friend. So.
Thank you very much. We're going to wrap up the year with a shift to the international scene, as scary and depressing as it is, and try to get some insight into it from Graham Allison, the longtime dean of the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard, the Douglas Dillon Professor of Government there, and the former Undersecretary of Defense. We wish you all a happy Thanksgiving.
Across the dusty roads, hear the organ play. Packed up my Chevy at the break of day, headed east on 2-lane highways. Stopped in a town where the courthouse stands, shook every hand, felt the dreams and their plans. From small town porches to the steps of state lines, voices rising up in proud design. Grassroots hearts can change the course we're on. One by one we'll carry on. In the Capitol halls, I joined the crowd. Spoke for the hopeful, spoke for the loud. Heard every story written in calloused hands. Found every neighbor in these scattered lands. From small town porches to the steps of state lines. Voices rising up in proud design. Grassroots hearts can change the course we're on. One by one we'll carry on. From small town porches to the steps of state lines. Voices rising up in proud design. Grassroots hearts can change the course we're on. One by one we'll carry on, carry